There are many saints in the month of November, also October, and it's hard to pick out one or two that are most important. I would strongly suggest, follow your calendar and realize those great saints that we have who may not mean much to us, but when we learn about their lives, of course, it's a great thing. On November the 23rd, we celebrate the memorial of Blessed Miguel Pro. I don't know whether you remember or not, but in the early part of this, or excuse me, sorry to say this century, this is 21st century, early part of the 20th century, there were some religious persecutions even to our neighbor to the south in Mexico. Mexico, although 90% of the people were Catholic, still the government became very, very anti-clerical and anti-church. I can remember when I first used to travel to Mexico, it was forbidden for me to dress in clerical garb. I think it still is. Maybe it's repealed. But if I could be arrested if I wore clerical garb on the streets. So they had these terrible laws against the church could not own any property. Priests and nuns could not dress like that on the streets. It was forbidden for a member of the government, for the president or any member of the Congress to even talk to a religious person. Terrible laws. Well, in these laws, there was a man named Miguel Pro. He, as a teenager, he was quite a cut-up and a jokester and so on. One time he got in trouble because he masqueraded as a priest and collected funds for the poor, which of course he didn't use for the poor. At any rate, later he experienced a religious conversion. He couldn't study in Mexico, forbidden, so he went to Belgium to study and he became a priest and then came back during this terrible time of persecution. He had many, many different disguises as a priest and he would try to have mass. So forbidden to have mass, but he would have these disguises and go from place to place. Finally he was arrested and was condemned to death, allegedly for plotting against the government. As he was dying, just before he died, he said, "Viva Cristo Rey, long live Christ the King." Well, he's one of those that we honor. He's still just a blessed, a beatified, but not canonized. His celebration is November the 23rd. On November the 18th, we celebrate the feast of St. Rose Philippine Duchesne. St. Rose Philippine Duchesne and a group of other nuns were in France during the time of the French Revolution, terrible persecutions there, so they came to this country. She ministered to the Indians. We ought to realize she was one of the saints that lived here in Kansas for a while. She was a missionary to the Indians at Sugar Creek, Kansas, which is just a stone's throw from Fort Scott, Kansas. So she never learned the Indian language, and so they called her "She Who Prays Much" in the Indian tongue. We honor her on November the 18th. On November the 15th, we honor one of the great saints of the 13th century, St. Albert the Great. He was the teacher of St. Thomas Aquinas. I've always marveled at this particular period because we have Albert the Great, teacher of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure were contemporaries at the University of Paris. King Louis IX, St. Louis IX used to invite them over for supper at the palace. I wonder what the conversation was like with Albert the Great, Bonaventure, Thomas Aquinas, and Louis IX. At any rate, we honor Albert the Great on November the 15th. One of the times when I was in Cologne, Germany, I came out of the Dome, the cathedral there, the wonderful cathedral, and if you go down to the right, there's a winding street that goes about 6 blocks down, and there is an old Dominican priory there. Go downstairs in the basement there is just a very simple, there are other tombs there, but there's a simple slab, and on the slab just simply says Albertus Magnus, Albert the Great. He would have wanted it that way. He's a very, very simple person, and as I say, this great teacher of the teachers, teacher of Thomas Aquinas and others. And he's the one who said when they were making fun of Thomas Aquinas as the his portly weight and so on, he said, "You will see this person, he will set all Europe on fire by his learning." So we honor him, Albert the Great, November the 15th. On November the 24th, we honor the Vietnamese saints and his companions, St. Andrew Dong Lac. I don't know a great deal about his life, but he In those times, of course, the church experienced many persecutions, and with Andrew, they would try to have someone stomp on the crucifix. He held his legs up, would not do it. Many times, of course, they would bribe the guards, let him go, but finally, this one time he said no, he was just going to suffer and give good example to his flock. So Andrew Dung Loc and other martyrs of Vietnam, we celebrate them on November the 24th. So I would say, look in your calendar of the saints, and maybe look up and see, well, what is it about these lives? Because the church has this calendar in order that we can grasp something from it, in order that we ourselves may grow to say, well, you know, they had a lot of things going against them, but they still wanted to preach the gospel of Christ. They still wanted to live that gospel. So how is it that we in our lives, in our circumstances, in our society, can show that we are Christians by the way we try to live according to the saints?